She said, "I could fire you for this, but I'd rather not." That one moment changed everything between us. The office hummed with the usual rhythm of a late evening, papers shuffled, keyboards clicked, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. But for him, the hours stretched on, slower than usual. Adam had always been the type to dive deep into his work, to find comfort in the quiet hum of the office when everyone else had left. It was easier that way, no distractions, no expectations. Just him, his thoughts, and his deadlines. As he meticulously reviewed the presentation one last time, he didn't hear the soft sound of footsteps approaching. It wasn't until the doorframe creaked, and her voice filled the room that he looked up. "Working late, Adam?" The voice, smooth and commanding, belonged to none other than his boss, Evelyn Hart. She stood just outside the door, leaning against the frame with a quiet grace that only someone like her could manage. Evelyn Hart was everything he admired about leadership: confident, poised, and fiercely intelligent. At 43, she exuded a rare elegance that made her stand out in any room. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, but they lingered on him, as if waiting for his response. There was a cool, professional air about her, but it wasn't cold. No, it was more like a controlled warmth, the kind of warmth that made you feel like you were in the presence of someone who knew exactly who they were. And he had always respected that. But tonight, something was different. "Just tying up some loose ends," Adam replied, trying to sound casual, though his heart raced just a little faster. There was something about her standing there, her arms crossed loosely, that sent a subtle jolt through him. She raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. "Really? I could have sworn you were done hours ago." Her tone was teasing, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something he couldn't quite place. He stuttered for a moment, suddenly aware of the clock ticking loudly in the background, each second stretching between them like a fragile thread. "I just wanted to make sure everything was perfect for tomorrow's meeting." "Perfect, huh?" Evelyn stepped into the room, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Adam could feel the air between them shift. She walked past him, not too close, but close enough for him to catch the faintest scent of her perfume, a delicate blend of jasmine and sandalwood that seemed to linger long after she'd moved. Her presence filled the room, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. He watched as she picked up a stack of papers from the edge of his desk, flipping through them with a calm precision that mirrored her professional demeanor. "That's the problem with perfectionists," she said with a knowing smile, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable authority. "You get lost in the details and forget to see the bigger picture." Adam looked at her, the words catching in his throat. She was close enough now that he could see the faint lines of experience around her eyes, the subtle strength in the way she moved. It wasn't just the confidence she exuded, it was the quiet vulnerability behind it. And it hit him, a realization so sudden, it made his pulse quicken. For all her power, Evelyn wasn't untouchable. She was human, just like him. But before he could say anything, she was gone. Her smile lingered for a brief second as she turned to leave, and she glanced back over her shoulder. "Remember, Adam," she said softly, her voice low, teasing once more. "If you ever need help with that perfectionism, I'd be more than happy to offer some advice." And just like that, the door clicked shut behind her, leaving Adam alone with his thoughts, and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. He wasn't sure what it was about that moment, but he couldn't shake the feeling that things between them had shifted in a way he couldn't quite define. The next day was like any other in the office, at least on the surface. Yet, something felt different to Adam. He couldn't pinpoint what it was, but the air seemed thicker, heavier, like there was an invisible thread pulling him closer to Evelyn without him even trying. They'd exchanged pleasantries in the hallway, as they always did, but this time, there was an unspoken tension in the way their eyes met. It wasn't quite romantic yet, but it was undeniable. The workday passed slowly, with Adam buried in spreadsheets and reports. But around mid-afternoon, a sudden shift came. Evelyn had scheduled a quick impromptu meeting in her office, just the two of them. At first, Adam figured it was about the project he'd been working on. After all, she was always direct, always focused. But today, when he stepped into her office, he noticed something different. She wasn't sitting at her desk, reviewing papers, or commanding the space with her usual energy. Instead, she was by the window, looking out over the city, her posture slightly hunched as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her. The blinds were drawn halfway, casting a soft shadow over her features, and the late afternoon sunlight highlighted the lines on her face in a way that felt almost intimate. "Adam," she greeted him quietly, turning just enough to face him. Her voice was soft, almost distant. "I didn't expect you to come by so soon. I was just thinking." Adam stepped into the room, uncertain. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd never seen her like this, so exposed, so human. She smiled faintly, but there was a sadness behind it. "You could say that. It's just, sometimes it feels like I'm carrying everything on my own, you know. And it gets heavy." Her words weren't a plea for sympathy, but the weight of them hit Adam hard. He could hear the fatigue in her voice, the vulnerability in the way she spoke. There was a long pause, and Adam didn't know what to say at first. It was almost as if the confident, unshakable Evelyn he knew was slipping away, leaving behind a woman who was more fragile than she let on. Taking a tentative step forward, Adam's gaze softened, the professional barrier between them feeling more like an illusion now. "If it helps," he said gently, "you don't have to do it alone." Her eyes met his then, and for a brief moment, Adam saw something raw, a depth of emotion she rarely allowed to surface. The room felt small, the air thick with everything they weren't saying. Evelyn cleared her throat, breaking the silence, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Thank you, Adam," she replied, her voice steady once more. But for the briefest moment, Adam could have sworn he saw something else in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had started to form between them, something unspoken but undeniably real. A few days later, the office felt quieter than usual. The usual buzz of meetings and conference calls had died down, and most of the staff had left for the day. Adam, as usual, remained behind to finish up some work, his desk cluttered with files and reports. He preferred the solitude of the evening. The silence, the stillness, it gave him space to think. But this time, something was different. The familiar weight of his loneliness wasn't as present. Instead, a strange sense of anticipation lingered in the air. He was just about to close his laptop when he heard soft footsteps approaching from behind. Before he could turn around, Evelyn's voice reached him, calm yet warm. "Adam, are you still here?" He turned in his chair to see her standing by the door, looking more relaxed than he'd seen her in a while. Her blazer was off, and the sleeves of her blouse were rolled up, revealing her bare forearms. She smiled slightly, a contrast to her usual professional, put-together demeanor. There was something about her appearance tonight, something that made her seem more approachable, more human. "Yeah, just finishing up a few things," Adam replied, giving her a smile that felt oddly genuine. He noticed how she looked at him differently now, the tension between them palpable, but this time, there was a softness to it. Evelyn stepped further into the room, the quiet click of her heels the only sound breaking the silence. She leaned against the edge of his desk, her gaze falling to the papers scattered in front of him. "I thought I'd check in. It's been a while since we had one of those talks." She gestured toward the chair opposite him, silently asking if she could sit. "Of course," Adam said, motioning to the empty chair. She sat down, but there was no rush, no urgency to the way she moved. It was as if the weight of the day had lifted for both of them, if only for this small moment. They began talking casually, about nothing in particular, just the kind of small talk that felt unexpectedly comfortable. The conversation shifted to music and books, the kind of things they had never had a chance to discuss in the whirlwind of work. Evelyn spoke of a book she had read recently, her voice light and animated as she shared details. Adam listened, captivated not only by her words but by the way she expressed herself, her passion for something so personal, so unlike the businesswoman he'd always known. The space between them seemed to shrink, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world outside had ceased to exist. Evelyn's laughter, quiet and genuine, filled the room, and Adam found himself smiling more than he had in a long time. It was easy, this moment, no pretenses, no walls, just two people sharing something real. When the conversation quieted, and the weight of silence settled back between them, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was intimate, like they had both discovered something in each other that went beyond the usual roles of boss and employee. Evelyn caught his gaze, and for a second, there was a vulnerability there, something that seemed to invite him in, if he dared. "Thanks for staying late," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that lingered long after she spoke. Adam didn't answer immediately. Instead, he simply nodded, his heart beating faster than he expected. He realized, in that moment, that something had shifted between them, something quiet but undeniable. The following week, Adam found himself alone in the break room, sipping coffee and attempting to shake off the exhaustion that seemed to hang around him. The day had been a whirlwind of meetings, emails, and presentations. His mind was still reeling, caught between the demands of his job and the quiet moments of vulnerability he'd shared with Evelyn. Each encounter left him feeling more conflicted than the last. There was something about her, something that pulled him in, something that made him question the boundaries they'd so carefully built around their professional relationship. He was lost in his thoughts when the door to the break room opened, and there she stood again, Evelyn, her expression unreadable, her gaze steady. The usual poise she exuded was there, but this time, something was different. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fall away. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice teasing, but with an undertone that Adam couldn't quite decipher. It was playful, but there was something behind her words that made him pause. I'm just taking a quick break," he replied, his voice faltering just slightly under the weight of her gaze. He felt his pulse quicken, as if his every instinct was screaming at him to look away, to play it cool, but instead, he stood there, frozen in the moment. Evelyn walked closer, her steps measured, and when she spoke again, her tone was almost casual, though Adam could feel the subtle shift in her energy. "You know, I could fire you for this," she said, leaning against the counter in front of him, her arms crossing lightly over her chest. Her smile was knowing, almost mischievous, but there was something in the way she looked at him that made his heart race. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Adam thought he might have misunderstood. Was she joking? Or was this another test, another subtle way for her to measure the boundaries between them? He couldn't help but feel a sense of dread mixed with excitement. There was something dangerous in the way she spoke, something playful yet full of hidden meaning. He laughed nervously, trying to downplay the tension. "I didn't realize I was doing anything that bad," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. Evelyn's smile grew wider, but her eyes never left his. "Oh, I'm sure you didn't." She took a step closer, her presence overwhelming him. "But maybe you should be careful. I might not always be so forgiving." The subtle flirtation, wrapped in the form of a playful warning, made Adam feel a rush of conflicting emotions. Was this truly just a game for her? Or was there something deeper beneath the surface? He couldn't help but wonder. The line between professional and personal was blurring, and despite the teasing nature of her words, Adam felt a surge of something more, a desire to push forward, to explore what was simmering between them. Evelyn straightened up and turned to leave, but before she stepped out, she glanced back over her shoulder, her voice quiet but meaningful. "You're lucky I like you, Adam. Don't make me regret it." As she walked away, Adam stood there, frozen once more, his mind racing with questions and emotions he couldn't fully understand. The tension between them had only deepened, and though he tried to shake it off, he knew things would never be the same again. The following week, Adam found himself alone in the break room, sipping coffee and attempting to shake off the exhaustion that seemed to hang around him. The day had been a whirlwind of meetings, emails, and presentations. His mind was still reeling, caught between the demands of his job and the quiet moments of vulnerability he'd shared with Evelyn. Each encounter left him feeling more conflicted than the last. There was something about her, something that pulled him in, something that made him question the boundaries they'd so carefully built around their professional relationship. He was lost in his thoughts when the door to the break room opened, and there she stood again, Evelyn, her expression unreadable, her gaze steady. The usual poise she exuded was there, but this time, something was different. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fall away. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice teasing, but with an undertone that Adam couldn't quite decipher. It was playful, but there was something behind her words that made him pause. I'm just taking a quick break," he replied, his voice faltering just slightly under the weight of her gaze. He felt his pulse quicken, as if his every instinct was screaming at him to look away, to play it cool, but instead, he stood there, frozen in the moment. Evelyn walked closer, her steps measured, and when she spoke again, her tone was almost casual, though Adam could feel the subtle shift in her energy. "You know, I could fire you for this," she said, leaning against the counter in front of him, her arms crossing lightly over her chest. Her smile was knowing, almost mischievous, but there was something in the way she looked at him that made his heart race. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Adam thought he might have misunderstood. Was she joking? Or was this another test, another subtle way for her to measure the boundaries between them? He couldn't help but feel a sense of dread mixed with excitement. There was something dangerous in the way she spoke, something playful yet full of hidden meaning. He laughed nervously, trying to downplay the tension. "I didn't realize I was doing anything that bad," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. Evelyn's smile grew wider, but her eyes never left his. "Oh, I'm sure you didn't." She took a step closer, her presence overwhelming him. "But maybe you should be careful. I might not always be so forgiving." The subtle flirtation, wrapped in the form of a playful warning, made Adam feel a rush of conflicting emotions. Was this truly just a game for her? Or was there something deeper beneath the surface? He couldn't help but wonder. The line between professional and personal was blurring, and despite the teasing nature of her words, Adam felt a surge of something more, a desire to push forward, to explore what was simmering between them. Evelyn straightened up and turned to leave, but before she stepped out, she glanced back over her shoulder, her voice quiet but meaningful. "You're lucky I like you, Adam. Don't make me regret it." As she walked away, Adam stood there, frozen once more, his mind racing with questions and emotions he couldn't fully understand. The tension between them had only deepened, and though he tried to shake it off, he knew things would never be the same again. As the days passed, Adam found himself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts he couldn't control. The playful banter with Evelyn had evolved into something deeper, something that pulled at him in ways he didn't expect. It wasn't just the teasing comments anymore, or the stolen glances during meetings. It was the moments in between, the quiet pauses when their eyes met across a crowded room, the subtle shifts in her posture when she leaned a little too close, the way her voice softened whenever she spoke to him. The professional distance that once defined their interactions now felt like a fragile veil, one that was on the verge of being torn. Adam couldn't deny the effect Evelyn had on him. But it wasn't just her beauty or her confidence that made his heart race. It was the way she let her guard down just enough to show him a glimpse of her vulnerability. The conversation they'd shared in her office, the one about the pressures she faced, had stayed with him. She had given him something precious, an insight into the weight she carried, and Adam couldn't help but feel a sense of protectiveness toward her. He found himself noticing little things, how her eyes would momentarily drift off when she spoke about her personal life, like she was keeping something locked away, hidden. How her smile would falter, ever so slightly, when she was caught up in her thoughts. It wasn't the typical stern, boss-like demeanor he was used to seeing. Instead, it was a woman who, despite her power, had her own doubts, her own fears. And in those fleeting moments, Adam felt a growing connection that he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, he found himself in the break room again, trying to focus on a report but unable to shake the feeling of being pulled toward Evelyn. It was almost as if his thoughts were following her, trailing behind her like an invisible thread. When she walked in, it wasn't with her usual air of confidence, but with a quiet grace that made his heart flutter. She wasn't in a rush this time, her usual brisk pace replaced by something slower, more deliberate. She caught his eye, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. She didn't speak at first, just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You're quiet today," he remarked, his voice tentative but genuine. Evelyn's lips parted in a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been thinking," she said softly, her gaze drifting to the window, as though she were gathering the right words. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing all of this for the right reasons. If I'm pushing too hard." Adam felt a pang in his chest. He didn't know how to respond at first, unsure of where this conversation might lead. "What do you mean?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping ever so slightly. "I've always believed in being strong, in carrying the weight. But lately, I've been wondering if that's really what I need, or what anyone needs." Adam could feel the walls she had carefully built around herself starting to crumble. The vulnerable side of Evelyn, the one she rarely showed to anyone, was slowly emerging, and it was all he could do to hold back his emotions. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that it was okay, that she didn't have to carry it all on her own. But instead, he stayed silent, listening, giving her the space to process her own thoughts. For the first time, Adam saw Evelyn not as his boss, but as a woman who was just as human as he was. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about attraction anymore, it was about connection. They were two people, flawed, imperfect, caught in the same uncertain place, trying to navigate the complexities of life. As Evelyn looked back at him, their gazes locked once again, and Adam knew something had changed. She wasn't just his boss anymore. She was someone he was beginning to see in a new light, one that carried both the weight of experience and the potential for something much deeper. The next few days felt heavier, charged with an energy neither of them seemed willing to fully acknowledge. There were stolen glances during meetings, awkward silences between emails, and small moments where Adam would catch Evelyn looking at him with an intensity that both unsettled and captivated him. Each encounter seemed to stretch the tension between them, pulling it taut until something had to give. It wasn't a question of if it would happen, it was when. And for Adam, the weight of the unspoken words they kept dancing around began to feel like too much to bear. It was one late afternoon when Adam found himself alone in the office again. The silence of the empty building was almost soothing, the air filled with the distant hum of the city outside. He was reviewing a report for an upcoming presentation when the door to his office creaked open, and there she was, Evelyn, standing in the doorway, looking more serene than she had in days. Her usual polished appearance was slightly more relaxed today, her blazer draped over her arm, and her blouse unbuttoned just enough at the collar to reveal a hint of her neck. "Adam," she said, her voice quieter than usual, the usual sharpness replaced by something softer. "Do you have a minute?" Adam stood up, surprised by the request. It wasn't often that Evelyn sought him out after hours like this, especially when they'd both been so busy. "Of course, what's on your mind?" She stepped into the room, her gaze searching his face as if she were trying to read something in him, something that had been buried too deep to see. There was a slight tremor in her movements, subtle but noticeable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the weight of everything they hadn't said before hung in the air, thick and unspoken. Finally, Evelyn exhaled, the breath steady but laden with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her eyes flickering away from him, then back. "About everything. About my job, my life, and about us." She paused, her words coming out slower now, as if she was carefully weighing each one. "I've built this life where I've had to be in control all the time. I've always believed that strength meant keeping everything in check, my emotions, my relationships, even my own happiness." Adam watched her, the lines of her usual confidence starting to soften as she spoke. She wasn't the strong, unshakable boss anymore. In this moment, she was a woman who was revealing the cracks in the armor she'd built over the years. "It's just," Evelyn's voice faltered for a moment, and for the first time, Adam saw her guard slip entirely. "I've spent so much time convincing myself that I have it all together, but maybe I've been running from the things that matter. The things I've been afraid to admit. The things I want, but don't know how to reach for." Adam felt a pang in his chest. There was something so raw about what she was saying, something so human. He stepped a little closer, wanting to bridge the distance that still separated them, but also giving her space, unsure of what to say. "You don't have to do it alone," he said softly, the words slipping out before he could think better of them. Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes searching his, the vulnerability in them almost too much to bear. "I've always believed that," she whispered, "but it's hard to know who to trust when you've been burned before." Adam took a step closer, his heart pounding. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. It wasn't just a promise to her, it was a promise to himself, too. There was a long pause, the silence between them thick and heavy. And then, as if a dam had broken, Evelyn closed the distance between them, her hand reaching out to rest on his arm, a soft touch that held more meaning than any words could convey. "Thank you, Adam," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that." The moment was quiet, intimate. In that instant, Adam realized that this wasn't just about attraction. It was about trust, about opening up to someone who saw you not just for your strengths, but for your flaws, your vulnerabilities. And it was about knowing that, in spite of everything, the connection between them was real, deeper than either of them had ever allowed themselves to acknowledge before. As their gazes locked, neither of them pulled away. It was a small gesture, a fleeting touch, but in that moment, it felt like everything had shifted. The days that followed were filled with a quiet anticipation, like the air before a storm. Adam couldn't stop thinking about that moment in Evelyn's office, the way her hand had rested gently on his arm, the vulnerability she had shared, and the tenderness in her voice. For the first time, it felt like they were no longer two people trapped in the confines of professional roles. They were two individuals, human and raw, navigating an uncharted territory of emotions and connection. But there was still an underlying hesitation. The unspoken question lingered, what would happen now? Adam couldn't stop wondering if Evelyn had meant what she said. She had opened up to him, but would she retreat back to her professional armor once the weight of the moment passed? He didn't want to force anything, didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable or pressured, but the more he thought about her, the more he realized he couldn't deny what he was feeling. The connection between them had evolved in ways neither of them had planned, and it was becoming more difficult to ignore the pull they had toward each other. It was on a quiet Thursday afternoon that the opportunity to confront everything finally came. Adam was working at his desk, focusing on a report for an upcoming meeting, when Evelyn walked in. This time, there was no small talk, no teasing comment. She looked at him with a steady, almost solemn gaze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension that had been building between them was palpable, thickening the air in the small room. "Adam," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I've been thinking about everything. About us." Adam's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment they had both been circling around, the moment that could either break the fragile connection they had built or cement it into something deeper. His palms were slightly clammy, and he felt a rush of nerves in his chest, but he didn't want to run from it. He didn't want to shy away from what had begun between them. I think it's time we stop pretending," she continued, her voice quieter now, but with a strength that made Adam's heart swell. "I know we're in uncharted territory, and I know that this is complicated. But I don't want to run from this anymore. I don't want to keep pretending that the way I feel doesn't matter." Adam felt a weight lift off his chest. He had been holding his breath, afraid that what he felt wasn't mutual, that Evelyn's openness had just been a fleeting moment of vulnerability. But now, standing before him, she had laid her feelings bare, and for the first time in their entire relationship, there was no more distance between them. She wasn't his boss anymore. She was just Evelyn, the woman who had shared her fears and her heart with him. "I feel the same way," Adam said, his voice soft but certain. He moved closer to her, his step slow but sure, as if he were crossing the threshold into something new. There was no need for grand gestures, no rush to make this moment into something more than it already was. It was enough just to be there, in that space with her, knowing they were both ready to face what came next. Evelyn smiled, a small, genuine smile that made her eyes soften. "I'm glad," she whispered, her voice full of relief. The distance between them was gone now. As if by some unspoken agreement, Evelyn reached out, her hand slipping gently into his. Adam's heart fluttered as their fingers intertwined. It was a simple gesture, but it held everything: trust, hope, and the quiet promise of what could be. The room felt warmer, the weight of the world outside suddenly irrelevant. In this small, quiet moment, Adam knew that whatever challenges they might face ahead, they would face them together. This wasn't about roles or expectations anymore. It was about two people who had discovered something real, something worth exploring, and no matter where it took them, they were both ready for it. And in that moment, as Evelyn's hand rested in his, Adam knew they had crossed the threshold into something new. Something beautiful.